Well, you've written 2 memoirs, Just One More Day and One Day at a Time. How did you go from doing that to writing fiction?
Well, I was already writing fiction.
But what's the transition like from doing a memoir and then fiction?
I wrote these because I was having therapy, thanks to my mad existence, when I was in Los Angeles. And then anyway, when you're in LA, you have to get therapy.
Everybody does to get therapy, yes. Exactly, very in.
I didn't want to be any different. So, so I was having this therapy, and the therapist suggested that I should write things down because that's just what I do. And so it would be easier for me. You know, some people maybe do it in pictures, or some people might draw things. And for me, it was easier to write things down. And so as I started to write, I felt my mother more strongly than I have ever had since she died, really. And so I started to write the book, or write my little exercise, as if she was telling the story of being a young mother who was going to die and leave 2 small children. And it was because I'd written this book, in fact, that I didn't want to do Never Say Goodbye, because I had already done a book about, although my mother was much younger than Josie in Never Say Goodbye. And then as I felt my mother's voice sort of taking me over, and if you had ever known my mother, you would know she does take you over.
As do many mothers.
Yeah, exactly. And so I then found my own voice from that time, age 7. And I started then to tell the story of what it was like to be 7 and know that your mother was ill, or something was wrong, but not quite knowing what was wrong. And that is, I mean, this book's even funnier in places, really, because it's just about how young Susan thinks what she thinks is going on.
Right.
And I, of course, thought my mother had another family that she was going to see, when actually she was going into hospital to have treatment.
Oh, wow.
And then my mother being bossy and difficult with nurses, and being very difficult with my dad, who is just an angel and long suffering. But there were a lot of fights between the 2 of them that I do remember. And that was the frustration, the fear. And of course there was not, this was back in the 60s, so there was not the support there.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand, and they didn't know where to turn for help. They were trying to do this on their own. Children were never allowed into hospitals at that time, so I had no idea that my mother really was in a hospital.
Yeah.
I would have to, if I went, I would have to wait outside in the car. So it was, so it was coming out of the therapy that got me to write this. And of course the most difficult part of the book to write, obviously, was when my mother was at the end, and saying how she felt. But I mean, I like to think in a way it was her saying it. I mean, it sounds a bit batty, I know, but it was...
Don't worry.
But that by then she was so ill, she was tired, and she actually was ready to go. There was no more she could do, and she was relinquishing. And sad as it is, I didn't feel that she died in a state of great fear. She was kind of reconciling herself to the need to leave that body because it was now so diseased. So, yeah, so it was a tricky end to write, because of course then I went into the grieving process very much that I hadn't done as a child. And after the book had been published and was this sort of quite surprising success, and I had a lot of emails from people then asking me what happened to my dad and my brother.
Wow.
Which was why I then wrote One Day at a Time, to tell what happened over the next few years and how my dad coped with being a single parent with a monster of a teenager, and how he survived that. Although I did have one email, which was just a treat, from somebody after Just One More Day, who wanted to know what happened to Susan. Sweet. I know. It's quite a difficult one, really, because I was kind of looking at it thinking, now, how come she doesn't get it? And how can
she get it? And
how can I write back to her not make her feel stupid.
Did you write back to her?
Well, I did. And as gently as possible. And she emailed me back immediately and said, "No, God, I feel really stupid now." Oh, well, I handled that well, didn't I? But she just said she couldn't get the idea, the picture of me as I am now. She couldn't get that picture out of her mind, and she just couldn't see that I had been that little girl. So she just thought it was a different Susan for some reason.
Now, how can people find out more about Never Say Goodbye and follow you online to find out what you're doing next? Because I know you write 2 novels every year.
Yeah. So. Well, I have a website, of course, which is susanlewis.com, so that's quite easy. And a Facebook page, which is Susan Lewis Books. So I think they're all sort of quite easy to find. And I hope they're in the bookshops.
Great. Thank you so much for coming in. I hope you enjoy your time in South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much.